billionaire dropped his most precious possession on the concrete floor of a fading athletic complex off the interstate. A championship ring made of white gold, encrusted with 84 custom-cut diamonds, and bearing a private inscription on the inner band that no journalist had ever been allowed to photograph. He did not call the police. He did not notify his security detail. He did not even realize it was missing from his coat pocket until he was 30 miles down the highway. But the night security guard, earning $11.20 an hour, found it wedged between a rusted bench and a vending machine at midnight. The guard did not slide the gold into his pocket. He did not leave it in the plastic lost-and-found bin at the front desk. He did not wait for the morning supervisor to handle it. He climbed into his battered Besedan, turned the key twice to wake the dying alternator, and drove 50 miles through a blinding Ohio blizzard to return it. What happened when that piece of gold changed hands would shatter a billionaire's cynical worldview, expose a corporate predator hiding behind institutional protocols, and prove that the true measure of a man cannot be bought, sold, or liquidated. 41-year-old LeBron James sat in the back of a luxury transport vehicle overlooking the skyline of Cleveland, Ohio. He had built a personal net worth exceeding $1 billion on a singular, unyielding principle: outwork everyone and trust absolutely no one. The world knew the headlines, the historic scoring titles, the lifetime contracts with sportswear giants, and the media empire that dictated cultural trends across the globe. They saw the king on a throne of glass, surrounded by public relations managers, financial advisors, and executive assistants who scheduled his existence in precise 10-minute increments. But they did not know the boy from Akron. They did not remember the child who lived in 12 different apartments in a span of 36 months, carrying his belongings in heavy black trash bags, because the rent was late and the landlords were merciless. Searing poverty does one of two things to a human soul. It either breaks it completely or it encases it in steel. LeBron had chosen the steel. He had watched childhood friends disappear into the system and business partners turn into informants the moment the numbers on the check grew large enough. From the day his career exploded into a multi-million-dollar industry, he operated under a silent gospel. Loyalty is a luxury item that only people who do not have bills can afford to talk about. In the real world, everyone has a price, and if they haven't sold you out yet, it simply means the offer wasn't high enough. He built his inner circle like a fortress, blocking out the noise, evaluating every handshake through the cold mathematics of return on investment. He ate his late-night meals in private suites, spoke to corporate boards via encrypted networks, and never let a stranger get close enough to see the exhaustion behind his eyes. On this specific evening in mid-January, the wind off Lake Erie carried a bitter, freezing sting that turned the pavement into black ice. LeBron was not in a boardroom, nor was he surrounded by his usual entourage. He had dismissed his personal driver 3 hours earlier, choosing instead to take a low-profile rental SUV and drive southwest toward his hometown of Akron. It was the anniversary of a personal milestone, a quiet date he never shared with his marketing team. He needed the silence of the highway. He needed to think about the distance between the man he was today and the boy who used to look at the winter sky through a broken window. The dashboard clock glowed 11 past 11. The storm was worsening, heavy snow accumulating on the windshield wipers like wet cement. His hands tightened on the steering wheel as the vehicle drifted slightly near the exit for a small town called Garfield Heights. A dull sign for an older, independent sports complex flickered in the distance, half its blue neon tubing dead from a summer thunderstorm. It was the kind of place where high school teams practiced when the public gyms were locked. A cavernous brick building with drafty corridors and grease-stained floors. LeBron pulled the SUV into the empty parking lot, throwing on a heavy dark hoodie and a low cap to obscure his face. He had a key to the side door, arranged weeks in advance through a local contact who knew better than to ask questions. He walked inside, the familiar smell of hardwood polish, stale sweat, and damp leather hitting him instantly. The overhead fluorescent lights hummed a low, discordant note, casting long shadows across the empty court. For 40 minutes, he shot basketballs in total isolation, the steady rhythm of the ball hitting the floor serving as the only therapy that could quiet his mind. Behind the glass partition of the main office stood a young man, thin but broad-shouldered, wearing a faded navy blue security vest that was visibly worn at the seams. His plastic name tag read Marcus. On the metal desk beside him lay a heavy, grease-smudged textbook titled Advanced Fluid Dynamics, its pages held open by a cheap plastic calculator missing the zero key. Marcus watched the lone figure on the court through the scratched glass, noting the fluid, unmistakable mechanics of the stranger's jumper, but he did not leave his desk. He did not ask for an autograph, nor did he pull out his phone to record a video for social media. He simply went back to his equations, checking his watch as his shift crept toward its conclusion. LeBron finished his routine, wiped his brow with a gray towel, and threw his belongings into his duffel bag. He walked past the front counter without looking up, his eyes fixed on the exit doors, his mind already accelerating back to the corporate logistics waiting for him in Los Angeles. "Drive safe in the snow, sir," Marcus said from behind the counter, his voice flat, steady, and devoid of the false enthusiasm common in customer service. LeBron did not break his stride. He offered a minimal, non-committal nod that was lost beneath the shadow of his hood, pushed through the heavy glass doors, and vanished into the swirling white darkness of the Ohio night. Exactly. 25 minutes later, Marcus began his final walkthrough of the facility. He checked the emergency exits, turned off the secondary breaker for the court lights, and swept the debris near the players' benches. As his broom brushed beneath the metal frame of the vending machine, he heard a heavy metallic clink. He reached down, his fingers brushing against a small black velvet pouch that had slipped from LeBron's coat pocket during his transition from the court. Marcus pulled the pouch open. The light from the single remaining safety bulb caught the white gold. It was a championship ring, massive, heavy enough to anchor a man's hand, blinding in its perfection. He turned it slowly in his palm, his chest tightening as he read the words engraved on the inner circle. "Gloria, we made it." To understand the weight of the gold resting in Marcus's palm, you have to understand the mathematics of his survival. Marcus lived in a basement apartment on Elm Street, a concrete box that smelled of laundry detergent and damp drywall. His father, David Vance, had spent 19 years as a lieutenant with the Cleveland Fire Department, until a structural collapse during a warehouse fire took his breath and his life in less than 6 minutes. He left behind a widow who died of grief 3 years later, a 19-year-old son, and a 9-year-old daughter named Maya, who was born with a defective ventricular septum, a literal hole in her heart that required specialized synthetic injections costing $412 every single month. The Vance family did not have a safety net. They had a mountain of red tape. Marcus had managed to secure a partial academic scholarship to the Cleveland Institute of Technology, a fiercely competitive engineering program, by staying awake until 3 in the morning every night under the glow of a single desk lamp. He did not study for fame. He studied because his father had always told him that equations were the only things that landlords couldn't lie about. But the scholarship only covered 60% of the tuition. The remaining $4,800 a year had to be earned by hand, $11.20 at a time, standing behind the counter of the athletic complex, while the rest of the city slept. Every dollar Marcus made was already spent before he touched the paper. His rent was $550. Maya's medication was $412. The monthly payment on his student ledger was $200. His car, a 2005 Ford Taurus with rusted rocker panels and 204,000 miles on the odometer, had a transmission that slipped whenever the temperature dropped below freezing. The amber check engine light had been glowing on the dashboard for 11 months, a permanent orange scar that Marcus had learned to ignore because the diagnostic fee alone equaled 2 days of groceries. Now, he stood beneath the buzzing fluorescent lights of an empty gym, holding a piece of white gold that could liquidate his entire reality. He knew what it was. Anyone who had ever glanced at a sports section knew the ring that marked the beginning of LeBron James's global kingdom. On the black market, or even through a discreet pawnbroker in downtown Chicago, that ring was worth at least $85,000 in raw materials, and triple that to a private collector who didn't ask questions about provenance. $85,000. That was 7 years of Maya's heart medication. That was his entire engineering degree paid in full, with enough left over to replace the Taurus's dying transmission and move his sister out of a basement apartment where the mold grew in the corners of the ceiling. Nobody had seen the ring fall. The security camera in the snack aisle had been broken since the autumn floods, its lens covered by a thick layer of gray dust. The facility log only showed that an anonymous client had rented the court. LeBron had arrived alone, departed alone, and was likely already sleeping in a 5-star suite behind a wall of security guards who would take 24 hours to realize the loss. Marcus closed his fist around the gold. The sharp edges of the diamonds bit into his skin, a minor physical pain that seemed to steady his breathing. He could feel his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The justification came easily, the way it always does when a man is staring at a bill he cannot pay. He is a billionaire. He has 3 more of these. He won't miss it. The insurance will buy him another one by Tuesday noon. But as Marcus stared at the glass partition of the office, his eyes fell on a faded, laminated photograph tucked into the corner of the frame. It was his father, David, standing in front of Engine Company 14, his face covered in soot, his arms slung around a rookie paramedic. His father had died in a coat that belonged to the city, protecting a building that belonged to a real estate conglomerate, for a salary that barely paid for his own funeral. He had never owned anything made of gold. But on the night before his final shift, he had sat Marcus down at the kitchen table and handed him a rusted iron wrench. "If you find something that doesn't belong to you, Marcus, you give it back," Tia's father had said, his voice thick from 20 years of inhaling diesel exhaust and smoke. "Not because the captain is watching. Not because you'll get a medal. You do it because your character is the only property the city can't repossess when the fire takes the house. If you lose that, you're just a squatter in your own skin." Marcus let out a long, ragged breath that formed a brief cloud of mist in the unheated corridor. He slid the velvet pouch into the deepest pocket of his heavy coat, walked to the main breaker, and threw the switch. The facility plunged into total darkness. He walked out into the freezing night, the snow now falling so thickly that the streetlights looked like distant dying stars. The Taurus groaned when he turned the ignition, the belt squeaking against the frozen pulleys for 12 agonizing seconds before the engine finally caught. The gas gauge sat precisely on the line between empty and a quarter tank, roughly 4 gallons of regular unleaded. He pulled his phone from his pocket, his fingers stiff from the chill. He opened a public flight tracker and cross-referenced it with a local sports bulletin. LeBron's private aviation firm usually operated out of Burke Lakefront Airport, but because of the blizzard, all private ground operations had been rerouted to a secure corporate hangar near Akron-Canton, 52 miles south, down Interstate 77. Marcus looked at his wallet. He had one $10 bill, one 5, and 11 single-dollar bills crumpled in the cash slot. $26, the exact price of a full tank of gas in his rusted sedan. It was the money he had set aside for Maya's school lunch fees for the upcoming 2 weeks. He didn't hesitate. He pulled into the self-serve station across the street, stuffed the $26 into the automated slot, and watched the digital number count up on the pump. Every click of the machine felt like a toothache. He capped the tank, climbed back into the freezing interior of the car, and shifted the transmission into drive. The gears slipped once, a loud, metallic thud echoing from the undercarriage, before the vehicle caught the traction control and rolled onto the snow-covered blacktop of the interstate. The drive was a descent into an empty white purgatory. The highway stretched south without a single other vehicle in sight. Just Marcus, the steady orange glow of the check engine light, and 52 miles of freezing darkness. The heater in the Taurus worked only on the driver's side, forcing him to switch his hands on the steering wheel every 5 minutes to keep his fingers from locking up. The radio could only pull in a single AM station out of Canton, a low, crackling broadcast of an old blues singer performing a track about a man who walked through the mud because the dry land had forgotten his name. Marcus kept his left hand pressed against his chest, right over the pocket where the ring sat. He could feel it through the heavy wool, a small, hard knot that seemed to carry its own gravity. He wasn't thinking about a reward. He wasn't thinking about a handshake or a photograph with a celebrity. He was just trying to outrun the voice in his head that kept telling him he was a fool. He was a 26-year-old, nobody driving in the opposite direction of his own financial survival, spending the last $26 of his disposable income to return a fortune to a man who hadn't even looked him in the eye. Behavioral scientists often write about the friction of integrity, the precise point where the cost of doing the right thing becomes higher than the human mind can rationally support. Statistics show that when an object's value exceeds a worker's annual income, the rate of return drops to less than 5%. Marcus was carrying 4 lifetimes of his salary in his pocket, and the snow was beginning to pile up past the sedan's rusted bumper. By midnight, the highway had disappeared completely under 6 inches of fresh powder. The Taurus drifted twice, the rear tires losing their grip on the black ice beneath the drifts. Marcus gripped the wheel until his knuckles turned white, his eyes strained against the glare of his high beams reflecting off the falling flakes. He didn't turn back. He couldn't. The mathematics of his life had already been calculated, and the only way out was to finish the problem. At 12 minutes past 1 in the morning, the rusted Ford Taurus crawled off the exit ramp near the Akron-Canton Airport. The corporate hangar was hidden behind a perimeter of tall steel fencing and security checkpoints, its massive arched roof glowing with the dull white light of high-sodium security lamps. But Marcus did not park at the hangar. A public bulletin on his phone had indicated that due to the expanding blizzard, LeBron's party had checked into the Grand Metropolitan Hotel, a towering structure of black granite and smoked glass that catered exclusively to executive travelers and foreign dignitaries visiting the regional industrial parks. Marcus pulled the Taurus into the far corner of the hotel lot, parking 3 rows behind a fleet of midnight black Escalades with identical government-tinted windows. He switched off the engine. The car died with a heavy, wheezing shudder, the radiator releasing a thin hiss of steam into the freezing air. Marcus pulled his coat tightly around his shoulders, gripped the small velvet pouch in his pocket, and walked toward the rotating glass doors of the entrance. The lobby was an expanse of polished white marble and heated air that smelled faintly of expensive cedarwood oil and fresh linen. A massive crystal chandelier hung from a ceiling 3 stories high, casting sharp reflections across a lounge filled with leather sofas and low glass tables. Behind the mahogany reception desk stood a woman in a tailored navy blazer, her gold name tag polished to a mirror finish. As Marcus stepped onto the marble, his wet work boots left a trail of gray, slushy water across the pristine floor. His security vest was faded, the hem of his jeans frayed from years of walking concrete corridors, and his hands were red from the cold. The receptionist looked up, her expression freezing instantly into a mask of professional suspicion. "Can I help you with something, sir?" she asked, her voice carrying the practiced, icy politeness designed to deter individuals who did not belong in a $400 a night establishment. "I need to get a message to one of your guests," Marcus said, his voice raspy from the drive. "His name is LeBron James. I found something that belongs to him at the facility in Garfield Heights." The receptionist's eyes traveled down Marcus's wet vest, then back to his face. She did not look at her computer screen. "Hotel policy strictly prohibits us from confirming or denying the residency of any high-profile guests," she said, her fingers resting near the silent security button beneath the counter. "If you have lost property, you can leave it at the Municipal Police Precinct, 3 blocks north." Marcus felt his throat tighten. He had spent his last $26 on gas, driven through 50 miles of black ice, and his sister's medication was sitting on a kitchen counter, 40 dumb behind him. He did not move. "I'm not leaving it with a precinct," Marcus said quietly. "I'm going to make sure it gets into his hands. I'll wait right here." Before the receptionist could respond, the heavy elevator doors at the back of the lobby slid open with a soft electronic chime. 2 men stepped out onto the marble. The first was an executive assistant in a charcoal 3-piece suit, carrying a leather briefcase. The second man was Thomas Vance, no relation to Marcus, the senior regional director of Vanguard Athletic Holdings, the conglomerate that owned the very facility Marcus patrolled. Thomas Vance was 54 years old, wearing a bespoke cashmere overcoat, his silver hair groomed perfectly, and his fingers adorned with a heavy corporate signet ring. He was in town to negotiate a multi-million-dollar arena naming rights extension with LeBron's media group. Thomas Vance was a man who had built a career on the absolute optimization of human capital. He did not see people. He saw operating expenses, shifting liabilities, and compliance protocols. As he walked toward the main exit, his eyes caught the wet trail on the marble. And then he saw Marcus standing at the counter in his company-issued navy vest. Vance stopped dead in his tracks, his brow furrowed as he recognized the logo on Marcus's shoulder. "Marcus," he said, his voice cutting through the quiet lobby like a whip. "What are you doing here?" Marcus turned, recognizing the man whose signature was stamped on the bottom of his bi-weekly $11 checks. "Mr. Vance," Marcus said, "I'm here to return a personal item to Mr. James. He dropped it at the court an hour ago." Vance walked over, his leather shoes clicking sharply against the stone. He did not look at Marcus's face. He looked at the wet boots, the wrinkled vest, and the cheap plastic calculator protruding from Marcus's coat pocket. "You left your post at the Garfield Heights facility?" Vance asked, his voice dropping into a low, menacing register. "You abandoned a Tier 3 corporate asset during an active winter storm warning?" "It was past midnight, sir. My shift was ending, and the item was too valuable to leave in a locker." "Silence," Vance said, cutting him off with a sharp flick of his wrist. He turned to the hotel receptionist, offering a smooth, dismissive apology for the disturbance before turning back to Marcus. "The Employee Handbook, Section 4, Paragraph 11, states explicitly that any abandonment of property boundaries without written authorization from a regional supervisor results in immediate termination and the forfeiture of all internal accruals. You are fired, Marcus, effective 12 minutes ago." Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. "Mr. Vance, please. My sister's insurance rider is tied to my employment status. I just need to give this back to Mr. James." "You don't need to give anything to anyone," Vance said, stepping closer, the smell of his expensive cologne filling the space between them. "You are a low-level independent contractor who just committed corporate negligence. Whatever you found on that court belongs to Vanguard Holdings under the standard abandoned property disclosure agreement. Hand it over to me right now, or I will have my manager call the county sheriff to report an internal theft." To prove his authority, Vance reached out and hot-do the paper cup of complimentary hotel coffee Marcus had been holding to warm his hands. The dark liquid splashed across Marcus's scuffed boots and onto the white marble floor. Vance pulled a pristine leather ledger from his pocket and held out his hand. "Put it here. And then get out of my sight before I ensure your academic transcript at Cleveland Tech reflects a moral turpitude violation." The lobby went completely quiet. The only sound was the steady, rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock near the lounge and the low hum of the heating vents. The receptionist sat motionless, her eyes fixed on her screen, hiding behind the protocol of non-interference. Marcus stood perfectly still for 41 seconds. He looked down at the dark puddle of coffee on the floor, then at the hand Vance had extended toward him. He could feel the weight of the white gold in his chest pocket, heavy, cold, and pure. He looked Vance directly in the eye, his jaw tightening until a muscle in his cheek twitched. "I'm not giving it to you," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a whisper that seemed to carry more weight than Vance's corporate threats. Vance laughed, a dry, humorless sound that didn't reach his eyes. "Fine," he said, pulling his phone from his overcoat. "Let's see how your sister's heart medication handles a felony indictment on your record. Sit on that sofa and don't move an inch until the authorities arrive." Marcus walked over to the furthest leather sofa, his boots leaving one last mark on the rug. He sat down, placed his calloused hands over the velvet pouch on his knee, and prepared to wait out the dark. At exactly 7 past 7 the next morning, the heavy brass elevator doors slid open once more. LeBron James stepped into the lobby, wearing a dark gray athletic fleece and low sneakers, his face relaxed, his movements deliberate. He had spent the last 2 hours on an encrypted phone call with European distribution partners, his mind entirely occupied by logistics, contract renewals, and equity shares. He was walking toward the private dining room where a buffet had been prepared for his group when his personal security lead leaned in and whispered something into his ear, pointing toward the far corner of the lounge. LeBron stopped. He turned his head slowly and saw a thin young man sitting upright on a leather sofa. The young man was wearing a wrinkled navy security vest with a dark stain near the pocket, his eyes bloodshot, dark circles carving hollows into his cheeks. On his knee, his calloused hand rested over a small black velvet pouch. LeBron walked over, his security detail maintaining a two-step boundary behind him. He did not say hello. He did not look at the slush on the floor. His eyes went directly to the pouch, then to Marcus's face. "How much do you want?" LeBron asked, his voice flat, rhythmic, and perfectly controlled. "Not thank you. Not what happened on the road. Just how much?" Marcus blinked, the fatigue making the bright lights of the lobby seem to blur at the edges. "Sir, I do not want anything," Marcus said, his voice raw from the lack of sleep. "This belongs to you. You left it under the bench at the court last night." Marcus stood up, his joints popping from hours of sitting in the chill of the lobby, and held out the pouch. LeBron took it carefully, opening the drawstring with 2 fingers. He pulled out the massive white gold ring. The 84 diamonds caught the morning sun through the high glass windows, casting fragments of light across the room. He turned it over, his thumb pausing over the hidden engraving on the inside. "Gloria, we made it." For a fraction of a second, LeBron's jaw tightened, his hand trembling just enough for Marcus to notice. "That inscription," Marcus said softly, his voice steady. "She must have been a great woman to raise someone who remembers where he came from." LeBron did not answer. He stared at the ring for 11 seconds, his face an unreadable mask of cold mathematics. Then he reached into his leather travel portfolio, pulled out 5 crisp $100 bills from a strap of emergency cash, and extended his hand. "For your trouble," he said. Marcus looked at the 5 bills fanned out between the fingers of a billionaire. He did not reach for them. "I appreciate the gesture, sir," Marcus said, looking LeBron directly in the eye. "But I did not drive through a blizzard for a reward. I drove here because this ring was yours, and it wasn't mine." LeBron's hand remained in the air, the money stationary between them. Nobody drives 50 miles through a level 3 storm in a dying car to return a fortune to a stranger for free, LeBron said, his voice dropping into a dangerous, quiet register. Everyone has a price, young man. You're just pretending yours is higher. Marcus adjusted his faded vest, his shoulders straight despite the exhaustion. My father was a lieutenant with Engine Company 14, Marcus said, his voice echoing clearly across the marble. He died in a burning warehouse protecting property he didn't own. Before he left for that shift, he told me that my character is the only asset the city can't repossess when the fire takes the house. He would say I did this for free. I say I did it because it was the right thing to do. And where I come from, those are the exact same thing. LeBron slowly lowered his hand, sliding the $500 back into his pocket. For the first time in 31 years of business negotiations, the king had absolutely nothing to say. He stood in the center of the Grand Metropolitan, holding a piece of gold that a kid making $11 an hour had just protected with his life, refusing a cash handout like it was nothing more than scrap paper. Before the silence could break, Thomas Vance stepped out from the reception alcove, his phone in his hand, a smirk playing on his lips. Mr. James, Vance said, his voice dripping with corporate sycophancy. I apologize for this independent contractor's insolence. The authorities are outside now. I've already executed his termination paperwork for gross negligence and abandonment of Vanguard property. We will ensure he doesn't trouble your organization further. LeBron turned his head 3 inches to look at Thomas Vance. He looked at the bespoke cashmere coat, the corporate signet ring, and the smug certainty on the director's face. Then he looked down at the dark puddle of coffee on the rug where Vance had hut-dough Marcus's cup the night before. You fired him? LeBron asked, his voice low, almost imperceptible. Yes, sir, Vance said, nodding quickly. Protocol is absolute. We cannot have individuals who violate security boundaries managing our premier assets. It's an issue of compliance. LeBron walked past Vance without acknowledging his nod, his security team shifting to block Vance from moving forward. LeBron walked to the front desk, picked up the house phone, and dialed a direct number to his chief legal officer in Los Angeles. I need an immediate compliance and liability audit on Vanguard Athletic Holdings. LeBron said into the receiver, his voice cold as the ice on Lake Erie. Check their tax filings, their labor distribution reports, and their independent contractor insurance riders for the last 5 years. Call our commercial lenders. We are pulling the naming rights extension for the Cleveland Arena effective noon today. Find every piece of paper that GON director Thomas Vance has signed, and buy the debt on his buildings. I want his entire portfolio on my desk before the market opens tomorrow. He hung up the phone and walked back to where Vance stood, the director's face now turning a sickly pale white as his phone began to vibrate violently in his palm with urgent notifications from his corporate headquarters. You think people are just line items in a ledger, Vance, LeBron said, standing a full 4 inches taller than the director, his shadow completely covering the older man. You think you can use your protocols to turn human beings into grease for your machines. But your system just broke. Your price was a naming rights contract, and you just lost it because you couldn't recognize a man who couldn't be bought. Vance opened his mouth to speak, his hands trembling, as he stared at the screen of his phone, realizing his 30-year career in sports management had just been liquidated in less than 2 minutes. He tried to step toward LeBron, but the security team stepped in, guiding him firmly toward the rotating doors, where the snow was still falling. LeBron turned back to Marcus, who was standing by the sofa, holding his grease-smudged textbook under his arm. Where is your car? LeBron asked. The rusted Ford Taurus did not make the return trip to Garfield Heights. LeBron's personal transport team towed the vehicle to a specialized mechanical facility in downtown Cleveland, while Marcus sat in the passenger seat of an insulated SUV, watching the snow clear from the highway lines. 2 days later, a manila folder sat on LeBron's mahogany desk in his private office overlooking the lake. Inside it was a comprehensive overview of Marcus Vance's financial and academic reality, compiled entirely from public records and institutional ledgers. LeBron read the numbers twice, his face expressionless, but his fingers tracing the edge of the paper with a steady, deliberate pressure. Marcus owed $12,400 in medical debt from his sister Maya's initial cardiac stabilization. His bi-weekly paycheck of $358 after taxes was automatically stripped of 40% before he could buy groceries. Maya's synthetic heart injections cost $412 every 30 days, a rolling debt that hung over the basement apartment like an eviction notice. Marcus had taken his primary mechanical engineering certification exam once, failing by a narrow margin of 3 points, because he had worked a 16-hour double shift at the athletic complex the night before the testing window closed. His brain operating on less than 2 hours of sleep because he couldn't afford the $180 rescheduling fee. LeBron set the folder down next to the white gold championship ring. The math was simple, brutal, and undeniable. This 26-year-old kid, earning $11.20 an hour, had held a piece of metal in his hands that could have cleared his family's debt, secured his sister's health for a decade, and paid his tuition in full. Instead, he had spent his last $26 on regular unleaded gas, driven 50 miles through a level 3 blizzard, sat in a hostile lobby all night without sleep, and looked a billionaire in the eye to refuse a $500 cash handout, not because he didn't understand the value of a dollar, but because his father had taught him that some things cannot be repossessed. LeBron picked up his phone and placed a call to the Dean of Engineering at the Cleveland Institute of Technology. 36 hours later, Marcus received an official courier packet at his basement apartment. Inside was a document bearing the corporate seal of the Spring Hill Foundation. First, a full, unrestricted academic scholarship covering the remainder of his engineering degree, including all laboratory fees, textbook allocations, and specialized testing software. Second, an immediate appointment to a paid technical residency within the logistics and infrastructure division of LeBron's regional development firm, offering a real salary, predictable daylight hours, and a professional resume foundation. Third, full, comprehensive family medical coverage through the corporate healthcare network, ensuring Maya's cardiac injections and specialist appointments were covered with a $0 deductible. There was a singular handwritten note attached to the front of the contract, signed with a bold, simple L. I am not giving you a handout, Marcus. I am investing in an asset that proved its value when the lights were off. I opened the door. You walk through it on your own. The systemic changes did not stop with Marcus. Thomas Vance was removed from his position as regional director of Vanguard Athletic Holdings following a shareholder audit triggered by the loss of the arena contract. His private real estate ventures, heavily leveraged through secondary lenders, were bought out by LeBron's investment group, forcing him to face an internal restructuring that stripped him of his executive bonuses and exposed his history of independent contractor exploitation to the state labor board. He did not go to prison, but he sat in a deposition room. 3 months later, his hands shaking as he signed a settlement agreement that dismantled his 30-year corporate legacy. Forced to acknowledge that the rules he had used to crush his workers had finally turned on him. LeBron was changing too, in ways his media team did not broadcast. He began taking his morning meals in the main facility break rooms, speaking directly with the maintenance crews, the security personnel, and the courier drivers. He learned their names, asked about their shifts, and looked them in the eye when they answered. He was remembering the boy from Akron, the child who used to watch the rain through a broken window, realizing that the steel armor he had worn for 31 years wasn't a fortress at all. It was a cage. One evening, before boarding a flight back to Los Angeles, LeBron pulled his phone from his pocket and called his daughter. She didn't answer on the first 3 rings, but he held the device to his ear, his voice raw, when the voicemail tone finally beeped. I met someone, Amara, LeBron said, his eyes fixed on the gray winter sky over Ohio. A kid from Akron who reminded me of the man your grandmother wanted me to be. I am trying, baby. I am trying to take the armor off. That's all I wanted to tell you. I love you. He hung up, staring at the screen for 11 minutes. She did not call back that night, but 2 days later, a short text message appeared on his device. I'm glad you're back on the road, Dad. Let's have dinner next Sunday. 14 months later, the storefront on University Avenue in downtown Cleveland opened its doors. It was a clean, modest office with large glass windows and a simple metal sign that read Vance Engineering Specialists, Community Infrastructure Design. Marcus sat at a polished oak desk, his certification plaque mounted on the wall behind him. His sister Maya, sitting in the reception area, coloring a textbook, her breathing steady, her cheeks possessing the healthy flush of a child whose heart was whole. The door chimed, and LeBron James walked inside, wearing a simple dark pullover, his daughter Amara walking beside him. Marcus stood up, extending his hand, his grip firm and unhurried. Congratulations, Marcus, LeBron said, looking around the small office. The blueprints you submitted for the Akron Youth Recreation Center were perfect, accurate down to the inch. Marcus smiled, his eyes dropping to his desk for a brief moment before meeting LeBron's gaze. The numbers don't lie, sir, Marcus said softly. I just wanted to make sure the foundation was strong enough to support the people who need it. Amara stepped forward, shaking Marcus's hand, her fingers lingering for an extra second as she looked at the young engineer. Thank you, Marcus, she said, a genuine smile clearing the tension from her face. Thank you for giving me my father back. Marcus shook his head slightly, uncomfortable with the praise. I just returned a piece of metal, ma'am, he said. No, Amara whispered, looking at LeBron, who was staring out the window at the crowded street below. You returned something much bigger.